All
We can
right.
always look back at the question.
On air. Welcome, guys. Stoked for this awesome Google Hangout session. Got our guest speaker tonight, little baby. Cool. Um, yeah, so let's get talking about this book, right?
All right.
We got a few questions we're going to answer. Question number one. What's question number one?
Question number one is, why did Yang choose to incorporate the story of the Monkey King into his memoir? I personally, I mean, I obviously don't know exactly why Yang decided um, to include the Monkey King in his memoir, but from what I know about the book and reading about Jin, um, I feel like he probably included it because it was something that he was taught a lot, and like it was talked about a lot when he was a child. Um, it seemed like something that was very relevant to his growing up, and as children, we're always told stories of folklore, whether that be about the princesses or the Goldilocks and the Three Bears or what have you. And so I imagine that this is a story that is very common in Chinese, literature. And he wanted to include that to kind of put a spin on his memoir and kind of show how folklore was a part of his life, even though he seemed to dislike that part of his life pretty heavily. What do you guys think?
I think that's kind of cool. A kind of cool way to think about it. Because like he's like you said, the story is about it's about himself and how he's trying to like, kind of escape his culture, but he's the way he chooses to talk about all this stuff is by kind of embracing that culture at the same time. So it's I guess it kind of just shows that he as a person has grown and is kind of matured. Um, obviously, I mean, obviously he's matured, since he was a kid. But it's kind of cool that he would choose this method to kind of show that, and show that growth that he's had personally. If that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like ironic almost. You wouldn't think that he would hold something that was so probably so close to him as a child um, when he's retelling this story about how he pretty much hated growing up Chinese in America. Um, because it just seems like that's not something, it seems like it's something that you would want to push away from yourself, especially if it's that traditional.
Well, especially because Chinese food is so good, like orange chicken, Beijing beef, like it's really good stuff. So I don't know.
I don't know how that relates, but we'll run with it.
I think he chose to incorporate it because it's a really relatable story. Um, the fact that he was, I guess, ashamed as a kid to be Chinese, and how this monkey was ashamed to be a monkey when it's just who they are and there's nothing shameful really about it. And they both come to realize that you can't change who you really are. Just think he incorporated it because it's like a metaphor. It's
I was gonna say the same thing. And like you had said, Amy, like growing up, he was kind of ashamed of his culture and who he was as a Chinese individual. So as we get older, like even me as an American, I'm sometimes ashamed to be an American, especially with what's going on in this world. But as as we get older, we learn more about our culture, and we look back on the stories that we've been told as kids, or the folklore that we've heard, and we come to realize how much of a impact it had in our lives. So I think he realized that the Monkey King was a big impact for him. So
Yeah, I think that's really cool because I mean, I'm trying to think of stories that my parents told me when I was a child, and I don't think there's any story that I can really relate to in any way if I were to write my own memoir. It's interesting to think about what kind of stories we would tell about our lives if we had the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, true.
Okay, the second question is, how does this folklore adaptation function in Yang's storytelling?
Well, I think we've kind of been talking about that, right? I mean, basically, he's using his culture to talk about all this. I don't know. Didn't we just discuss this kind of like? I feel like we did. I mean,
Yeah, the two stories intertwine, and I like how they come together in the end. I actually wasn't expecting that. Maybe I'm just oblivious, but that really caught me off guard.
It was a pretty big twist that they kind of all connected, and that Jin was actually Danny, or his like alter ego, I guess, who Jin wanted to be. And the monkey was connected to him because of his son. So
Yeah, I when I was reading it, I was at work, and one of my coworkers had actually read the book already, and she I like looked up and I was like, "What?" Because it was near the end when everything comes together, and she was just like, "Yep." I don't know exactly what part you're referring to, but I can imagine because it is kind of fast at the end, the way that it all connects to each other. Literally within like the last 15 or 16 pages. Um, but yeah, it is interesting how he intertwines real life with folklore. So I imagine that's the answer to that question.
Okay, then what societal attitudes, values, or ideals are conveyed and challenged in this book?
well, the big one is obviously racism.
yeah.
Uh, the whole time, Jin like he even kind of starts because he's not accepted as in like an Asian kid or whatever. He's like he gets bullied and made fun of and all that stuff because he's different than everybody else. And I think that's obviously a pretty crappy thing, to have happen to somebody. And so the book speaks to that point of how hard it is to be bullied and how hard it is to be treated differently. But I think also another thing is like it talks about how badly people want to be able to fit in this world. Like everyone wants to fit in somewhere. You know, no one likes to just be different. I mean, most people don't like to be different. Everyone likes to fit in at least to like some sort of group or clique or whatever. Um, and so I don't know. I think Jin didn't feel that, and he wasn't comfortable with who he was. Just like the Monkey King, he didn't want to be some monkey with no shoes. He wanted to be, like a god, and he wanted to fit in with all the people who he esteemed as better than himself. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess there's kind of a good message in there. It's like just love who you are and accept who you are, and um, don't try and run from it. So
I think this would be like a really good book to read in middle school or high school, but now that we're in college, we're all kind of like, yeah, like be yourself, love yourself, it's great. But in middle school and high school, you kind of don't have the same ideals within yourself because you are wanting to fit in and be like the cool kids. So it's more relatable. Um, but yeah, like in college, I genuinely enjoyed reading this book, um, but it definitely was something that is easy to relate to from my past. But now I'm kind of just like, yeah, I rock, and I'm good the way I am.
exactly. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and it was. I also thought it was very interesting seeing the way that it was written, especially Chinky's character, could have been very problematic had it, been written by somebody who wasn't actually Chinese.
Oh yes.
Definitely. If it was written by some white dude,
Yeah.
very controversial, but
Yeah.
it's all good.
So
All right.
I really think I'm just gonna add something. I really think identity was like playing a huge part in this book because the Monkey King and Jin, they both struggled with their identity and knowing who they were and loving who they were. Exactly what you said, Amy. So this is a good book for those who struggle with their identity or struggle accepting who they are, no matter what ethnicity or race you are.
Yeah. Um, Part of this video assignment is to use direct quotes. I don't actually have the book on me, but just kind of going off of this question, the part in the book where Danny, is talking to the pretty American girl who I think is Amelia, but I'm not really sure. And he says like, "I'm not like him," as in he's not like Chinky. And when I read that, I was kind of like, well, like obviously you're this like, you know, jock, and white and popular and great, whatever. And I just thought that like bit was like very interesting because it was also very foreshadowing into the end when everybody connects and Danny is actually Jin, and you can kind of see that internalized racism against his own kind, which I thought was really interesting because it didn't. For me, I was kind of confused on why anyone would speak like that because it seems so obvious, but he clearly still felt, like he was still himself, even when he had sold his soul, to say, um, and yeah, didn't like who he was, even when he had changed, which I think is a very interesting thing to note as well.
Yeah. The herbalist's wife, that creepy quote she said to Jin at the beginning, it's easy to become anything you wish, so long as you're willing to forfeit your soul. So when I first read that, I was like, you're kind of crazy, lady. But after reading these questions, it does make sense. Like, Jin was willing to forfeit his soul so he could become more like Danny, or someone that looked exactly like Danny. He was willing to change to fit in and to be somebody he wasn't, like what his soul wasn't. So
Yeah, that part was really eerie, the old lady when she said that, because I was like, it felt so real when I read it. I just felt like there is an old lady out there who genuinely believes that you can sell your soul and like become somebody completely different if that's what you desire. And the thought of that is kind of crazy, but also kind of believable just with, folklore traditions and stuff.
That one's kind of hard to like fit in with everything else in the story.
Yeah.
I don't know what to kind of make of that.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to question number 4. How does American Born Chinese challenge conventional literary forms and genres? So, when I first found out that this was going to be the first book we read and found out that it was 240 pages, I made sure to get on it as soon as I could, since it had to be read so soon in the semester. So, but then when I opened it up and saw that it was a graphic novel, I was like, oh, this is great. Because we don't have to worry so much. And I think that definitely, I mean, I've never read a graphic novel that was a memoir. I've only read a few memoirs just in my life in general, but it's very interesting to see the way that the graphic novel was set up and how the I don't know, like the greater than and less than signs that was, saying that it was translated from Chinese when it was written in those carrot things. Um, and so I thought that was really interesting too, how the author incorporated Chinese translations into English as well as normal, regular English, and also in the form of a graphic novel. It made it really easy to read and just more interactive, I guess, in my brain. Like, I can imagine things so much easier with the pictures already there.
Yeah, true.
My question is like, what are other literary norms or whatever? What are this is
Literary forms?
what's the question asking? It's like how does this book challenge like literary whatever?
Yeah, how does
Literary,
it challenge conventional literary forms and
Yeah.
What are other conventional literary forms?
I mean, most, memoirs are written in first person and it's just like this happened and then this happened and then this happened and this happened. But the way that this book was written, I thought it was pretty much fiction. It didn't occur to me that this was somebody's life.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole thing, literally until this video assignment, it didn't occur to me that this was somebody's actual life, even though it makes sense. Obviously, there is some fiction to it because I don't think this, Jen guy just randomly turned into this Danny guy. Because if he did, that'd be intense. But
It kind of makes me think, I wonder like how many other random like make believe stories are just based off of real life, like real people's lives and experiences.
yeah, I mean, it happens all the time because people write things that they know, and so and things that they've seen. So it's just a very different creative way to go about writing kind of, what happened to you as a child. I imagine this experience definitely changed the author to who he is today.
and she used humor throughout the whole book to talk about a really serious issue, which is racism and the way society um, views, I guess, outsiders or people who look different. But like the whole book it's a light read. It's not like super heavy or intense or like disgusting with racism, but it still addresses a serious issue.
Yeah. And especially, attending BYU Hawaii, you see a lot of the stereotypes mentioned in this book. And it I mean it kind of gives you a better idea of what that would actually be like. Because there were some times when I like kind of felt for Jen. I'm like, ooh, that's cringy. Like I can't name a specific point right now, but like just kind of in general, just the way that like Chinky's character was, I just felt like he was so intense all the time that I was like, oh, maybe you should tone it down. But like everyone's different, I guess. So
Yeah.
I don't know how that goes.
All right, what is the literary value of this book within its intended audience? What about beyond that audience?
Well, we should probably first discuss what we think the intended audience is. Do we think it's people within this same ethnic background or not within the same ethnic background?
I feel like it's intended for everyone, but at the same time, like movies like Black Panther, everyone they loved it, but a lot of African Americans loved it even more because there were, Black people. And so I just feel like those are of this, ethnicity, Asian culture. They can relate to it a lot more because, me as a white female, I don't get that kind of racism. So those racist parts, of course, it's disgusting and I don't like it, but I don't relate to it in any way because that's never happened to me before. So when someone reads it, and they have experienced that, even if they aren't Asian, I'm sure they can relate to that.
Yeah. And
When I
unfortunately,
ordered this book on Amazon, it was under the teen novel
Oh wow.
section. So I actually kind of think her intended audience, or his intended audience, was teenagers, people who are coming of age and trying to figure out who they are, and maybe struggling with, identity or fitting in.
Right. Yeah. And if that's the case, like I know a lot of teenagers that don't like to read, right? And so the fact that it is, in graphic novel form is nice if, teenagers are the intended audience because it is an easy read and it makes it fun.
Good book to read your kids. Erin.
She's out.
Is it last
Well,
question?
So yeah, can we do in what ways does Yang make the ancient legend of the Monkey King relevant for contemporary readers?
I so that one part in the book when the Monkey King is like, I don't know if that god is like our god or if it's like Buddha or what. That was kind of confusing for me, but like the top god,
That's it. You guys.
yeah. When the Monkey
Soon.
King was like running away from him and like then like pees on that pole and then finds out that it was like the fingers of God. I thought that was so funny. Like
Oh, it's hilarious.
I was just like, oh my gosh. Because I mean, not that I can relate to like that situation specifically, but like, have you ever like done something, like, and like your parents found out about it or something, and then you're just like, that was totally the wrong thing to do because now they totally know about it, and it was like they were there the whole time or something of that nature. And I was just, I could kind of feel for him because I was like, oh no, I was like, those are the fingers of God. Like, just trying to imagine my own life like that just seems crazy. But you know, it was definitely not anything that I was expecting, and so for contemporary readers, just stuff like that makes it more fun and like relatable, even if it's not something that you can directly relate to. That's just kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. Side note, how old the Monkey King is because he kind of acted like a child the whole book, except towards the end. And I was like, kind of annoyed how stubborn he was.
Yeah. But maybe that's also another reason why the author included it was just because teenagers are stubborn too. And
True.
kind of like the faces in the graphics of the Monkey King and when he's like, oh, you can't come in here if you don't have shoes, like that whole sequence of events was just so funny to me because he's just like, are you kidding me? It's like honor code. Like people walk around without shoes all the time. So if somebody was like, sorry, you can't come to class without your shoes, like they would kind of look at them like, what are you talking about? Um, but yeah, it's just funny. I feel like that's how the author makes it, relevant for contemporary readers, is that it's funny, it's easy and relatable.
Yeah, for sure.
Aaron,
Erin, anything?
what's that?
do you know our time?
Yeah, it's been like over half an hour.
Oh, on the broadcast?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
Do you
so.
guys want to slip in some quotes or you could?
I didn't see anything about quotes on this.
it just says remember that each person should share at least 2 relevant quotes from the text. The response paper should be 1.5 to 2 pages double spaced. I don't have a book on me.
Yeah.
I don't
So
have the time either.
on the assignment at the bottom under the questions. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess what's really coming to mind for me is every time Chinky referred to Amelia as Letty American girl. Like that just like stuck in my head so much because I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how it would sound. And it made it all that more cringy, but it made it believable as well because that's I mean, I've had a lot of experiences, with people who English isn't their first language and so they have an accent and that's how it sounds and um it's very interesting how that, transpired um for Danny, I guess. 'Cause he just did not like it at all. I also one of the quotes that I liked was when the teacher would always like when he introduced Wei Chen, I think his name was.
Yeah.
And then also when he introduced Jin and he was like, he came all the way from China. And then he's like, San Francisco. And then he's like, San Francisco. And then with Wei Chen, he's like, and then he came all the way from China. And he's like, Taiwan. And he's like, Taiwan. It was like that would so happen. Like you see that happen in the movies all the time, like making assumptions about where people are from based on what they look like. Um,
That happened with my humanities teacher last year. Not
Yeah.
with me, but she assumed some guy was from Mexico because he spoke Spanish. I
Yeah.
was like,
And it happens to me all the time. Like, people don't, not exactly like that, but they're like, oh, what's your ethnicity? And, get into that conversation as well. So it is really relatable for me just because of, my experiences with people from different cultures so far being here at BYU Hawaii and working at the Reading Writing Center. But yeah, it's kind of my perspective on it. It was very, very eye-opening, very relatable.
yeah.
Okay, who's gonna write the first paper?
I don't know, but apparently we have one viewer. Someone's viewing us.
Oh, hello, random stranger.
Is it Blizzard or no? No, because we have to send the link. It's not.
Is it me? It can't be me.
Oh.
Well, we don't know who they are, right? Because they don't have video. Do they have video?
I don't know.
Someone's watching us, basically, is what I'm saying.
It's the FBI.
Okay, well, I'm gonna stop this broadcast.
Honestly.
Okay.